Hi people, this is me Ivan Verstyuk, and today in this YouTube episode I'm going to talk about which direction the war in Ukraine is developing after Russia and its army invaded on February 24th early in the morning. My very basic conclusion is that the war might probably take longer than many of us here would like to see. But that's perfectly understood, since Ukraine wants to liberate all of its territories and make sure all the citizens of Ukraine will be able to live under the Ukrainian rules, Ukrainian legislation and decrees from government in Kiev. The longer war is a complicated thing. Whenever I talk to people on the streets or like to taxi drivers, they would say something like the war will be somewhat like the World War II, which was fought for 4, 5, 6 years back then in the previous century. So that's what we should expect and what we should get prepared to. But I do not think the war is going to be that long. It's just going to be longer than many here expected. When the war takes longer, it has some implications for how we live here in Ukraine. These are implications for the Ukrainian society and for the Ukrainian economy. Obviously, people get tired of the war, both soldiers, military servicemen, and then also just civilians and all the regular people who follow the war news and still try to either to have a job or to do something war related or volunteer for some sort of activity, or just to take care about the people around, about their families. And that's how the nation through the war lives. I'll be clear on this. When the war started on February 24th, a normal life ceased to exist. Rules of life in Ukraine and principles of how we co-live here in this country, they changed overnight. Things became totally different on February 24th after we read the news about the invasion, and I saw the smoke from my balcony and saw that Russian aircraft was bombing outskirts of Kiev, western Kiev. So they changed a lot. And the very good thing is that when and how we are able to accept the changes. Those of us who are able to accept the changes happening in the country, which is a victim of Russian invasion, that's important. But many people are not willing to accept the changes and either behave like there is no war or just try to revive the rules, how the economy works and how the society operates, the rules that were in place in fact before the war and before the invasion and before the February 24th. So the main thing I want to say is that Ukraine is prepared for the longer war. If war takes many more weeks and months, we're still prepared to fight it until we win it and until we liberate all of Ukraine's sovereign territory. And the list of Ukraine's territories is mentioned in the country's constitution that was adopted back in 1996. And that's what our army is fighting for, to let Ukrainians live this sort of life they deserve to live, and they want to live, and they will live. Another thing is at this stage of the war, it's necessary for Ukraine, for the Ukrainian government, for the Ukrainian foreign ministry to communicate that we are still able to do some sort of diplomacy and negotiations about the war. That does not necessarily mean that we are going to do compromises, ceding our territories, and giving away anything to the Russian Federation. No, we're not going to do that. But we are able to negotiate whole range of humanitarian issues, like the prisoner swap, like the quality of life that Ukrainians on the occupied territories live through. That's important to us. And if that needs to be in the first step, that we start talking to Russia, we should be able to do this. To me, a big example in how diplomacy works and talks is Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. What he usually says is that the United States diplomacy is able and willing to negotiate where negotiations may lead to a certain positive result. That doesn't mean that Washington, D.C. has a deep trust or any sort of trust to the Kremlin and how things were done in Moscow, in Russia. But the door for negotiations should remain open in all of the cases, under all of the circumstances and obstacles that we have. What I see on Twitter is that foreign policy experts already say that Ukraine should engage in diplomacy more. At this point, it's not yet as popular approach within the Ukrainian society, but many people here in Ukraine also think that diplomacy should also be included in how Ukraine wins this war and gets its territories back. We can't trust Kremlin. Many times Kremlin proven that it's not a trustworthy side in any negotiations. It can break the rules, break the agreements, and it's hard to have any math of how you reach any sort of agreement, common sense, and common denominator while talking to Russia. But still, it's important to us to show that we have our door for diplomacy open. That's a very important thing. And then, going back to the domestic situation in Ukraine, we are having and experiencing a very deep economic crisis that affects us and our families, our way of living, our standards of living, quality of our life, and that brings this not very pleasant a line of pessimism among some Ukrainians. That's why people keep living for different countries. They become refugees. And people write me from various countries telling that the life is much better there, like in Switzerland or Canada or United States or United Kingdom. They tell me, Ivan, life is so good here. I'm not sure why you still staying in Kiev. Oh, well, my answer is that at this point I want to stay in Kiev with my country, with my nation, with my parents who are in their 70s, and they still hope a lot that Ukraine will win this war. And I hope too. And it's more than hope. It's that I'm sure that Ukraine will eventually win this war. And the ultimate win will be done by the Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefields. Ukrainian soldiers are doing a great job, both in the east and in the south. Ukrainian artillery is strengthened by the Western supplies, especially American ones and German ones, keeps pressuring the Russian army in the south, and almost each day we read news about all the losses that the Russian army is suffering in the south. Those are very substantial losses, and if you create a curve of a number of losses that the Russian army has been having in the southern operation area, then it's on the rise. The losses are growing for the Russian army, both with the military equipment, artillery, tanks, armored vehicles, and also personnel. The Russians losing lots of soldiers who find their graves in southern Ukraine. In the east, situation is a little bit more complicated, with the Russian army still trying to advance and to take more of the Ukrainian territory, but the Ukrainian army is pushing them back each day, each morning, each night. It's not that we are going to give up on the Donbass, despite that the substantial part of its territory is controlled by the Russian Federation and by the Russian army. Ukraine is intended to liberate all of its territories, even if some people still say publicly that Ukraine should negotiate and maybe consider giving up on some of the territories. That's not going to happen, because we have their constitution adopted in 1996 that tell us which territories belong to Ukraine. And these territories are recognized internationally as part of Ukraine. So we can't do anything that contradicts the Ukrainian constitution. That's our constitutional mission, constitutional obligation, and we're going to follow it. We're going to remain faithful to it. That's important to us as a nation that wants to have a richer, better life after the war ends, and the war will finally end. This month, on August 24th, we're going to celebrate the Ukrainian Independence Day. Ukraine obtained its independence back in 1991, when the United Soviet Union ceased to exist and was broken up by the 15 so-called republics that were part of the Soviet Union, and Ukraine wasn't them. So this year we're going to celebrate our Independence Day. This month we're going to celebrate the Independence Day, and that's an important holiday for us, because patriotism is on the rise in Ukraine, and we do have these great sacred feelings for the yellow-blue flag that is our national flag, and for a national anthem, and for the trident that is a symbol of Ukrainian statehood and Ukrainian nation's aspirations to have a better future, to have a better life that we all deserve and that we all want to have. It's too early and probably too hard to forecast how many more months and weeks the war is gonna take. But we are prepared to do this long term, as long as we are supported by the Western nations, who are our allies and partners and do the supplies, both for our army and also all kinds of humanitarian assistance and financial assistance that's needed for us to live through the war and to survive the economic crisis that is hitting us very hard. So right now we need to prioritize not only the battlefields but also Ukraine's domestic situation, as people might get disappointed about the chronology of war that it takes so long. So we need to pay attention to what people say, do, how they behave, how they interact with each other, what they write in social media. I mean, we still need to pay attention so the Russian propaganda wouldn't capitalize on what Ukrainians feel. Maybe they might be having some, emotional pessimism today or tomorrow, or they had it yesterday, and Russian propaganda will try to use those, societal disappointments that some people might be having. And we need to pay attention to this and to keep our solidarity and support for our national army that is fighting the Russians in a very, very fair and rule-based way. Ukrainian army pays lots of respect to the international law that regulates the war and the sovereign versus sovereign type of war that we are having here in Ukraine. To conclude, two things. We are prepared for the longer war, that's first thing. And the second thing, we need to pay more attention to the domestic situation in Ukraine, because it gets too complicated. War is a challenge for the Ukrainian society. And we need to follow what's happening and what needs to be done to make life for Ukrainians easier. Thanks for watching this. Glory to Ukraine.